Turn that pump off right now. Richard Dempsey's voice shattered the quiet morning. I was still in my robe, coffee steaming in my hand, when he marched up my driveway like a man on a mission. Clipboard tucked under his arm, HOA badge pinned crookedly to his polo. He looked more like a sheriff than a neighbor. His finger stabbed toward my well pump as if it had personally offended him. You're in violation of community standards, Sarah. Shut it down now. At first I laughed. Half in disbelief, half in nerves. Violation? Richard, it's a private well. It's been here longer than you or the HOA. But he wasn't listening. His face was already turning the kind of red that made the veins in his neck stand out. He waved the clipboard in my face, pages fluttering like angry wings. We've received a complaint. Water testing noncompliance. Your well is an environmental hazard. His tone was smug, rehearsed, like he'd been waiting for this moment. The early sun cut through the oak trees, glinting off his SUV parked behind him, with the HOA logo freshly stenciled on the door. He wasn't alone either. Two board members stood awkwardly near the sidewalk, holding phones, filming. My quiet corner of Clearwater Estates had become a stage, and I was the villain in his little performance. Richard, I said slowly, steadying my voice, this property came with that well. It's on the original county deed. I had it tested last spring. It's clean. Cleaner than that chlorine sludge you call community water. He smirked. That's not for you to decide. The HOA has authority over all utilities in this neighborhood. Something in me snapped. Authority? I repeated, my voice cracking just enough to make him smirk wider. Over my own water source? You don't own this land, Richard. You don't own me. His smile disappeared. He leaned in close enough that I could smell his cologne. Sharp, synthetic, overconfident. You'll regret talking to me like that, he hissed. This isn't personal. It's about safety. And compliance. He scribbled something onto his clipboard, tore a sheet free, and shoved it toward me. A formal notice, complete with HOA seal and his signature. Effective immediately, it read. Use of unapproved water source is prohibited pending inspection. A $2,500 fine printed in bold at the bottom. I looked at the paper, then at him. You're kidding. He folded his arms. No, Sarah. I'm protecting our community. You can thank me later. The way he said our made my skin crawl, because what he really meant was his rules, his profit, his control. I tore the notice in half and dropped it at his feet. You're trespassing. Get off my property. His expression twisted into something cold and self-satisfied. You'll hear from the board, he said, turning sharply on his heel. The two other men lowered their phones, pretending to look anywhere but at me. The sound of Richard's SUV door slamming echoed down the street. I stood there barefoot in the gravel, heart pounding, watching him drive off. The wind rustled the pine trees, and for a brief second, I almost convinced myself it was over. That maybe it had just been a power trip, a tantrum that would blow over. But the next morning, when I walked out with my coffee, something silver caught the light by the wellhead. My stomach dropped. A thick steel padlock clamped over the valve, gleaming like a warning. Hanging from it was a laminated tag stamped in bold red letters, sealed by order of the Clearwater Estates HOA. I stared at it, my hand trembling around the coffee mug, realizing the truth that would shape everything to come. This wasn't just about water. It was about control. And Richard Dempsey had just declared war. The HOA's water smelled like bleach and fear. Mine tasted like rain and rock. That difference made me their enemy. The first time I turned on the community tap, I nearly gagged. The water had that sharp chemical bite that burned your nostrils before it even hit your tongue. I could practically smell the chlorine from the next room. It was supposed to be treated and purified, according to the HOA pamphlet, but to me it smelled like control. Bottled, regulated, and sold at a markup. Everyone in Clearwater Estates was forced to pay into the community water system. The pipes ran through Richard Dempsey's empire, Dempsey Water Solutions, a company conveniently owned by his brother Mark. It was an open secret. The HOA claimed the program ensured quality and consistency, but what it really ensured was profit. Every month, homeowners were billed triple the county average for water that tasted like swimming pool runoff. I didn't pay it. Why would I? My spring-fed well had been on this property since the 1950s, dug deep into the limestone bedrock. The first day I moved in, I filled a glass straight from the tap, and it tasted alive. Crisp, mineral-rich, untouched by chemicals or bureaucracy. That water was part of why I bought this house. It was more than a source. It was a symbol of freedom. But the HOA didn't see it that way. A week after Richard's little power show on my driveway, the letters started, each one more threatening than the last. Immediate compliance required. Pending lien for unpaid utilities. Potential revocation of membership privileges. The arrogance practically dripped off the paper. When I took the issue up with my neighbors, most of them just whispered. At the mailbox in the cul-de-sac, during morning jogs, everyone had a story. Yeah, we've all complained, one older man told me, glancing nervously over his shoulder. But he finds ways to punish people who speak up. Late fees, lawn citations, you name it. It was like living under a silent dictatorship dressed in khakis and a polo shirt. So I did what I do best. I researched. I spent 2 nights cross-referencing county records, land plats, and bylaws. I dug through every dusty PDF the HOA thought no one would ever read. And then I found it, a clause buried deep in the original deed from 1953. My well was grandfathered in, legally untouchable. The realization hit me like a breath of clean air. They had no authority over my water, no matter how loudly Richard barked. I printed the county document, highlighted the clause, and attached it to a polite email. Dear Mr. Dempsey, per county records, my private well predates Clearwater Estates HOA charter and remains exempt from any collective water system mandates. Kindly remove all references to violation or penalty from my record. Regards, Sarah Mitchell. I hit send and smiled, imagining his face turning red as he read it. The reply came 5 minutes later. Just one line. You'll regret this defiance. That was it. No signature, no pretense of professionalism. Just a threat, plain and personal. I remember reading it 3 times, trying to convince myself it was empty, that he'd bluster, maybe throw another fine my way, and move on. But deep down, I knew Richard. He wasn't the kind of man to lose gracefully. He was the kind who'd make an example out of me. The next morning, as I was trimming hedges by the porch, I heard gravel crunching. A white pickup with a county logo rolled to a stop at the edge of my driveway. A man in a reflective vest stepped out, clipboard in hand, a fake smile plastered on his face. Morning, ma'am, he said smoothly. I'm with the county. Just here to do a water safety inspection. He flashed his ID, fast enough that I couldn't read the name. Something about the way he lingered near the well, avoiding eye contact, made the back of my neck prickle. And when I glanced past him toward the corner of the street, I caught a glimpse of Richard's black SUV, parked halfway down the block, engine running. The badge looked fake. The truck looked familiar. It was Richard's black pickup. The inspector was his puppet. He stood by my well with the confidence of a man who thought a reflective vest made him official. The laminated badge on his chest said County Water Department, but the font looked off like something printed from a home computer. I watched him from my kitchen window for a moment, heart pounding, before grabbing my phone and hitting record. Ma'am, he called out when he noticed me. Just a routine safety inspection. Won't take long. His voice was too casual, too rehearsed. He didn't introduce himself or show me proper credentials. When I asked for identification again, he flashed the badge so quickly I barely saw a name. Something that started with G, maybe Greg. But it wasn't the badge that caught my attention. It was the truck parked halfway down my driveway. The same black Ford F-150 with the dented fender I'd seen Richard Dempsey drive to every HOA meeting. The same faded Dempsey Water Solutions sticker on the rear bumper. My stomach dropped. I kept my phone camera low, pretending to check messages, but I was recording every move he made. He knelt beside the wellhead, scribbling something onto a blank clipboard, then pulled a small plastic vial from his pocket. No gloves, no proper sampling kit, just an unmarked bottle and a cheap test strip like the kind you'd buy at a hardware store. He dipped it into my well cap and frowned, shaking his head theatrically. "Looks like elevated contamination," he said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "You'll need to shut this down until further notice." I almost laughed. Contamination? That's impossible. This well was tested professionally 6 months ago. He shrugged, eyes darting toward the street, toward Richard's truck. "Just doing my job, ma'am." I felt heat rising in my chest. "Then show me your work order. Who sent you?" He hesitated for a beat too long. "The HOA requested this inspection." There it was. He said it out loud. My smile tightened. The HOA doesn't have authority over county water inspections. He froze, caught between arrogance and panic, then muttered something about needing to check with his supervisor. He turned, walking briskly toward the truck. Toward Richard's truck. And I filmed every second. He didn't even try to hide the license plate. Legal nugget. In most U.S. states, homeowners have the right to record anyone on their property, including so-called inspectors or officials, as long as it's for personal evidence. That night, I uploaded the footage anonymously to the local neighborhood forum under the title "Fake County Inspector in Clearwater Estates." Within an hour, the comments exploded. Neighbors recognized the truck immediately. "That's Dempsey's ride. I saw that guy at the HOA office last week. Is he even a real inspector?" The next morning, I called the actual county water department. When I gave them the badge number, the woman on the phone sighed audibly. "Ma'am, we haven't sent anyone to Clearwater Estates in months. Whoever that was, he wasn't one of ours." The confirmation made my blood run cold. Not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. Richard had escalated from fines to fraud, and now he was using imposters to intimidate me. I forwarded the county's email confirmation to my lawyer friend, but deep down, I knew official channels wouldn't protect me from whatever Richard had planned next. By evening, the post had over 2,000 views. Neighbors who had once stayed silent now whispered openly. Some even thanked me for exposing him. But victory has a way of inviting revenge. Just before midnight, I took my dog out for one last walk. The moonlight cast a pale glow over the yard, and something strange caught my eye near the well. The ground looked disturbed, wet, uneven. I stepped closer and froze. Muddy footprints circled the wellhead like someone had been pacing. 2 empty bleach bottles lay tossed in the grass, labels peeled from moisture. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The night air suddenly smelled sharp, faintly chemical, faintly wrong, and as I looked toward the road, I thought I saw a shadow move behind the trees. Tall, still, watching. The first sip burned my throat. The second made me cough. By the third, I knew someone had poisoned my water. It was early morning, the kind of still silence that usually comforts me. I'd drawn a glass straight from the kitchen tap, expecting that same cold mineral tang I loved. Instead, it hit my tongue like acid. The smell was unmistakable, chlorine, sharp and suffocating, the same chemical sting that haunted the HOA's water supply. My stomach turned. I spat the rest into the sink and turned on the tap again, praying it was my imagination. But the water ran cloudy, faintly yellow under the light. My heart raced as I grabbed a clean mason jar and filled it carefully. I sealed it tight, threw it in my truck, and drove straight to Clearwater Labs, the independent testing center 2 towns over. The technician, a woman named Paula who'd tested my water before, took one look and frowned. "That smell isn't normal, Sarah," she said, gloved hands moving fast. "We'll rush the analysis." I spent that day in a fog, checking locks, replaying last night in my head, scrolling through my phone footage of the bleach bottles near the well. I couldn't shake the image of muddy footprints circling the cap. By evening, Paula called back. Her voice was tight. "Your water's been contaminated, Sarah. Chlorine levels are through the roof. way beyond any safe threshold. Someone added it intentionally. I felt my knees go weak. Are you saying they poisoned it? She hesitated. Let's just say no one does this by accident. I called the sheriff's office immediately. They sent a deputy out an hour later. A tall, tired-looking man named Harris who clearly wanted to be anywhere else. He glanced at the well, jotted something on his notepad, then sighed. Look, ma'am, this sounds like a neighbor dispute. You sure it's not just overchlorination from runoff? I handed him the lab report. Do you see that number? That's industrial-grade chlorine. That's not runoff, that's sabotage. He shrugged, flipping his notebook shut. Could be civil business. Not criminal. Maybe file a complaint with the HOA. I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound that surprised even me. The HOA did this, I said quietly. He didn't even look up. Well, ma'am, unless you've got footage of someone pouring bleach down your well, my hands are tied. He drove off, leaving tire tracks in my gravel and a trail of disbelief in my chest. I stood there for a long time, staring at the still water, feeling the weight of helplessness press down. That night, fear finally turned into fury. I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house made my skin crawl. I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook, the lab report beside me, and something inside me hardened. If Richard and his cronies wanted to call my well unsafe, I'd show them what real purity looked like. I started scribbling ideas in the margin. Bottling, filtration, labeling. I wasn't thinking business. I was thinking survival. I would take the thing they tried to ruin and make it my weapon. My hands were shaking, but I tore out a sheet of paper and started sketching a logo. A simple design, a mountain ridge, a droplet, my family name. Mitchell Spring Water, 100% pure, 0% HOA control. The tagline came naturally, equal parts defiance and truth. I leaned back and stared at it. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd tried to poison me into silence, and instead, they'd lit the fuse for something far bigger. Outside, the well sat quiet under the moonlight, but in my mind, I could already see it differently. Not as a target, but as a brand. If the HOA wanted a fight, I was about to give them one. If they wanted me to stop using my well, I'd make sure everyone in town drank from it. I said it out loud the morning after I sketched that label, and the words tasted like a dare. My garage, which had always been a place for paint cans and gardening tools, suddenly felt like a workshop for a different kind of plan. I cleared a space between the workbench and the old lawnmower, swept dust into a pile, and started calling every supplier I could find. It wasn't sophisticated. A tabletop filler, a used sealing machine, off an online marketplace, food-grade tubing, and glass bottles that caught the light like small promises. I set up on folding tables, taped a banner to the wall, and arranged the first dozen bottles like trophies. The first day felt ridiculous and holy all at once. I filled each bottle with water drawn straight from the spring, the same water that had always tasted like limestone and cool mornings. I sterilized caps, labeled by hand, and taped on the little logo I'd sketched. A clean droplet cradled by a mountain ridge, the name Mitchell Spring Water printed beneath in block letters. My hands moved faster than my head. Making those bottles became a kind of prayer. The labels weren't slick or perfect, but they were honest, which mattered more than perfection. At the farmer's market, my booth didn't look like a threat. It looked like a small, proud thing. A folding table, a cooler of ice, and a stack of neatly sealed bottles. I passed out free samples first, watching people lift the glass to their lips with casual curiosity. The reactions were immediate and precise. Brows lifting, eyes closing, surprised smiles. "This is different," an elderly woman said, wiping her lip with the back of her hand. "It's like the water I grew up with." A young dad bought a case and said, "My kids won't drink our tap anymore." The compliments felt surreal, like applause for something simple and true. Word spread faster than I thought possible. Neighbors who had been too scared to meet my eye at HOA meetings came by with cash in hand. People swapped stories about chlorine stings and surprise bills. I listened more than I spoke, each story a quiet indictment of the system Richard had built. I kept a small notebook at the booth, scribbling down names and notes. Who wanted a weekly delivery? Who needed bottles for an event? Who had a family member with a sensitive stomach that couldn't handle the HOA water? It turned into a ledger of small rebellions. I didn't ignore the legal lines. I called the county's small business office and asked about packaging rules. The woman I spoke with was blunt and practical. Follow FDA packaging and labeling requirements, keep sanitation records, and you're fine as a private seller. The HOA had no jurisdiction over privately produced goods that met state and federal standards. That nugget of officialness felt like armor. I photocopied guidelines, tucked them into a binder labeled business, and put it on the shelf beside the sealing machine. Then came the afternoon Richard found me. I was mid-pour, hands cold from ice, when he appeared at the end of the row like a storm cloud made flesh. He didn't walk. He descended, jaw set, authority radiating like heat. His face was red, his voice low with rage. "You can't sell that," he said, stepping between me and a customer as if the bottles were a weapon. People stopped. The air got thin. "I can," I said, keeping my hands steady on the bottle. "It's my property, my water, and it's legal." He laughed, a hard sound that tried to slice through the market's hum. "Legal doesn't matter. You're creating panic. Next time I see that label, I'll bring the county and a lawyer." His threat was loud and public, meant to shame me into packing up. Instead, it gave fuel to the crowd. A woman I'd once seen nodding in a corner shouted, "Let her sell water. It's better than yours, Richard." Others clapped quietly at first, then louder. He left in a cloud of fury, but the damage he intended to do backfired. The market had already decided, with a chorus of small voices. They would drink what tasted like home. "Order!" Richard shouted, slamming his gavel like a tyrant in a courtroom he built for himself. All eyes turned to me, the woman they wanted to silence. The HOA clubhouse smelled like stale coffee and fear. Folding chairs lined up in crooked rows, a cheap microphone squealing every few seconds, and Richard Dempsey sitting at the head of a long table as if he were presiding over a Supreme Court hearing. The board members flanked him, half hiding behind stacks of printed evidence. A banner behind them read "Community Integrity Meeting," which would have been funny if the tension in the room didn't feel like static before a storm. I sat in the front row, holding a small folder in my lap. Lab results, county records, and one flash drive that could shatter the entire performance he'd planned for tonight. Richard adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat into the mic. "We're here tonight to address multiple violations committed by homeowner Sarah Mitchell, including defamation of the HOA, illegal commercial activity, and the distribution of unsafe water to residents." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. People leaned in, some whispering, others avoiding my gaze. He wanted this. The spectacle, the public humiliation. He leaned forward, voice dripping with mock civility. "Ms. Mitchell, do you admit to operating an unlicensed water business within Clearwater Estates?" I met his stare. "I operate a small legal bottling line using my own property and my own water. The HOA has no jurisdiction over it." He laughed into the mic, the sound distorted and mean. "No jurisdiction? You live in this community, don't you? You follow our bylaws like everyone else." I reached into my folder and slid a highlighted page across the table. "Show me where in those bylaws it says you control private wells. Go ahead, read it out loud." He glanced down, eyes flickering for half a second before he flipped the paper over. "That's not the point," he snapped. The crowd shifted again. Whispers, a few gasps. One man in the back raised his hand. "Actually, it kind of is, isn't it? If it's not written, it's not enforceable." Richard's gavel came down hard. "Order." But the room didn't quiet. Someone muttered, "He's just mad she's right." I stood, calm but shaking inside. "You want to talk about evidence, Richard? Let's talk about evidence." I walked to the projector near the back of the room, plugged in the flash drive, and clicked play. The screen flickered to life. A shaky video of a man in a reflective vest kneeling by my well. The same fake Inspector Richard had sent. The same black truck idling nearby with his company logo visible on the bumper. Gasps rippled through the room as the man said, "The HOA requested this inspection." I didn't look at Richard. I wanted him to feel the silence press in around him. Legal nugget number 3. HOAs can't regulate private wells unless it's explicitly written into the original covenants or deed restrictions. Anything else is intimidation, not law. When the video ended, the room went dead quiet. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to hum lower. One of the board members, a woman named Carol, leaned toward Richard, whispering urgently. His jaw clenched. "This video proves nothing," he said through his teeth. "You edited it." I raised my voice. "Then explain why your truck was there." He slammed his palm on the table. "Enough." But it was already over. The whispers had turned into open murmurs now. People questioning, doubting, realizing what he'd been doing. Richard's eyes met mine, dark and venomous. He leaned forward so only I could hear him. "You think this is over?" he hissed. "You'll pay for this, in court." I smiled faintly. "Then I'll see you there." The lawsuit hit like a hammer. Defamation, damages, violation of HOA policy. They weren't after money. They wanted obedience. The envelope arrived on a gray morning. Thick and heavy, stamped certified delivery. I didn't even have to open it to know what it was. The HOA seal glared up at me like a brand of ownership, and my stomach dropped. When I finally unfolded the pages, my hands were shaking. 10 counts of defamation. 3 of operating a business without HOA approval. 1 of malicious interference with community order. They were suing me for $150,000. It wasn't about the amount, it was about the message. Richard wanted me to crawl back, apologize, and stop fighting. He wanted to drown me in paperwork until I couldn't breathe. For a few hours, I almost let him. I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by scattered papers, my heart hammering against my ribs. I couldn't eat, couldn't think. Every line of legal jargon blurred together into a single word. Hopeless. I thought about selling the house, running somewhere quieter, somewhere I could live without fear. But then I caught sight of a bottle of my water sitting on the counter. Sunlight hitting the label just right. The words 0% HOA control shining like a dare. That simple phrase pulled me back to my feet. I needed help, not surrender. That's when I remembered a name, Laura Reyes. She was an environmental lawyer who'd done a few guest talks at the local civic group. I'd never met her personally, but everyone said the same thing. She fights dirty when she's fighting for the right reasons. I emailed her that night with a summary of everything. The poisoned well, the fake inspector, the fines, the threats. I attached the lawsuit, hit send, and went to bed with a knot in my chest. She called the next morning. Her voice was low, confident, measured. "I read everything," she said. "And Sarah, what they're doing is illegal intimidation. They've crossed about 10 different lines here. Let's talk." When I met Laura in her office downtown, she spread the HOA's complaint papers across the table like a surgeon about to perform an autopsy. "Classic abuse of process," she said. "They're using legal threats to suppress property rights. But here's the good news, if they open the books, we can open theirs." She filed an immediate response, a motion to dismiss and a counterclaim for harassment, fraud, and property interference. Then she dug deeper. Within a week, she'd uncovered what no one in Clearwater had dared to check. The HOA's community water system had been charging residents nearly 400% over the county's standard water rate. Worse, there hadn't been a single independent audit in 5 years. "Follow the money," Laura said, tapping the spreadsheet with her pen. "Richard's brother's company invoices the HOA bills residents, and the excess disappears. Classic shell billing." I stared at the numbers, disgusted. "They're robbing the whole neighborhood." "Exactly," Laura said, smiling faintly. "And now, they've picked a fight with someone who documented everything. Her calm turned my fear into fuel. Every phone call, every threat, every bleach bottle, it all became evidence. We organized it into binders, color-coded tabs, marking each act of harassment. By the end of the week, my kitchen table looked less like a battlefield and more like a command center. Then came the headline that changed everything. The local newspaper picked up the story after the courthouse filings went public. The front page read, "Homeowner battles HOA over water rights and wins support." The photo beneath showed my little farmer's market booth, sunlight glinting off the bottles like symbols of defiance. That morning, my inbox filled with messages. Neighbors offering help, strangers sending encouragement, even one retired attorney volunteering research support. For the first time in months, I felt something stronger than fear, hope. At the next HOA meeting, I placed a bottle in front of every board member. "Drink it," I said, "then tell me it's unsafe." The room fell silent. You could have heard the hum of the fluorescent lights and the soft hiss of the air conditioner. Richard sat at the head of the table, his tie too tight, his face stiff. His hand hovered over the bottle, but he didn't touch it. The rest of the board members looked at each other, confused, cautious, the same men and women who had voted to find me into oblivion now sitting in front of the very water they had condemned. "This," I said, pointing at the clear bottle, "is from the same well your president called a biohazard. Lab tested, county certified, pure." I slid the printed results across the table. "You've been selling chlorine and calling it safety. This is what real water tastes like." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The meeting room was packed. Homeowners standing shoulder to shoulder, most of them there out of curiosity or quiet anger. Some crossed their arms, others leaned forward, eager. One board member, a thin woman named Carol who had always looked uneasy during Richard's tirades, reached for the bottle first. She twisted the cap, took a sip and blinked. Then another. This is clean," she said softly. Then someone in the back whispered, "Cleaner than what we're paying for." That whisper was gasoline. Within seconds, the room buzzed with voices, frustrated, vindicated voices. "We're being ripped off. I pay $180 a month for water that smells like a pool. She's right, the HOA can't control private wells." Richard's gavel slammed down hard. "Order. Everyone calm down." His voice cracked with something he wasn't used to, fear. But the crowd wasn't listening. For the first time, people weren't afraid of him. They were angry with him. Neighbors, who had kept their heads down for months, were suddenly wide awake, asking questions, pulling out their own bills, taking photos of the lab report I'd printed. After that meeting, everything changed. Over the next few days, homeowners began canceling their mandatory HOA water service. Some even started filling jugs at my property, laughing nervously like they were breaking curfew. Carol resigned from the board the following morning, citing ethical differences. 2 more members followed within the week. Richard, on the other hand, panicked. He flooded the community message boards with warnings about unregulated contamination risks and illegal water distribution. He sent letters threatening $500 fines for association noncompliance. It was retaliation, pure and simple. Legal nugget retaliatory or selective enforcement by an HOA can constitute a violation of homeowners' rights under state and federal fair housing laws. Laura helped me draft a community notice quoting that law. Short, sharp, and public. I taped copies to every HOA bulletin board, mailbox cluster, and clubhouse door. I wasn't hiding anymore, and the community, finally, was standing beside me. One afternoon, as I walked my dog past the fountain at the neighborhood entrance, a man I barely knew stopped me. "You're brave, Sarah," he said. "We should have backed you sooner." I smiled, but said nothing. Courage was contagious. It didn't need applause. But courage also makes enemies desperate. That night, I sat on my couch, scrolling through news updates about the case. The neighborhood forum was alive with debate, people sharing proof, others calling for Richard's resignation. The tide had turned. Just after midnight, my phone buzzed with a notification from my home security system. Motion detected. Backyard. I opened the feed. The camera flickered in the dark. And there he was. Richard Dempsey. He moved with purpose, flashlight cutting across the yard, the beam glinting off the metal edge of my well cap. My throat went dry as he crouched down, looking around before disappearing off screen. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was proof. His flashlight beam sliced across my lawn. Then he leaned over my well and poured something in. I had it all on camera. For a few seconds I couldn't move. My fingers were frozen around the phone, eyes locked on the live feed as Richard Dempsey, the same man who'd stood in front of an entire community calling me reckless, crouched beside my well in the middle of the night like a criminal. The security camera caught everything, the glint of the bleach bottle in his hand, the motion of him unscrewing the cap, the liquid sloshing as he poured it down. My heart hammered against my ribs. He didn't even try to be careful. He knew exactly what he was doing. When he straightened up, his face passed directly under the camera's night vision lens. There was no mistaking him. The clean shave, the tight jaw, that same HOA polo he wore like a uniform. I watched him glance around, pocket his flashlight, and vanish into the shadows. For a long time, I just sat there in the blue glow of the phone screen, the truth pulsing in front of me. He'd done it again. Only this time, I had proof. I didn't sleep. I stayed up documenting everything. Timestamps, video files, screenshots. When the sun broke through the curtains, I was already at the sheriff's department. The deputy at the front desk recognized me from before. His eyes widened when I dropped the flash drive onto the counter. "Play it," I said. 10 minutes later, Sheriff Harris himself walked into the room. The same man who'd dismissed me weeks earlier now looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. The footage played on his office screen, Richard's face frozen mid-motion as he emptied the bottle. "Is that?" he started. "Yes," I said flatly. "Your HOA president." He leaned back in his chair, exhaled sharply, then called for a unit. Within the hour, a patrol car rolled through Clearwater Estates. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains as 2 deputies knocked on Richard's door. He tried to talk his way out of it. I could see his arms waving wildly from my window. But when they showed him the warrant, the bravado drained from his face. They led him down the driveway in handcuffs while cameras from the local news station filmed from across the street. The story broke before nightfall. Local HOA president arrested for well tampering. The headline splashed across every news site and TV feed in the county. The footage from my camera played on loop. Richard caught red-handed, his mask of authority shredded in an instant. I barely left my house that day. My phone didn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted statements, neighbors wanted to apologize, and one man from a nearby town said he'd been waiting years for someone to expose Dempsey's corruption. That evening, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. I didn't attend, but I didn't have to. Half the neighborhood was outside the clubhouse with signs demanding his resignation. Some brought their monthly bills, waving them like evidence. Others just chanted his name and the word resign. By the end of the night, the HOA's water committee had been suspended, and the Dempsey Brothers Company was under state review. The next morning, I got a call from the Environmental Quality Agency. A calm, serious voice introduced herself as Agent Mills. "Ms. Mitchell, we've received multiple complaints and copies of your footage. We're opening a formal investigation into Clearwater Estates' water system." She requested samples, not from my well, but from the HOA's main supply. I agreed to provide whatever information she needed. A week later, the results came in. I opened the email, expecting bureaucratic jargon. Instead, the first line froze me cold. "Bacterial contamination present. Unsafe for consumption. Not my water. The HOA's." The system Richard had built, the one he'd accused me of poisoning, was the real danger all along. Richard strutted into court like he still owned the neighborhood. By the time the verdict came down, he couldn't even look at me. The courthouse smelled faintly of coffee and paper, a quiet, sterile place where pride went to die. I sat beside Laura Reyes at the plaintiff's table, watching Richard Dempsey across the aisle. He was dressed in an expensive suit that couldn't hide the sleepless circles under his eyes. His lawyer, a slick man with gelled hair and too much confidence, whispered in his ear like a coach before a doomed match. It was surreal, seeing him there. The man who'd screamed at me on my porch, forged inspections, poisoned my well, now reduced to shifting nervously in his chair. But the arrogance was still there, simmering beneath the surface. When the clerk called his name, he straightened his tie like he was walking into a board meeting, not a reckoning. Laura stood to open our case. "Your Honor," she began, calm and sharp as glass. "This is not a dispute over neighborhood aesthetics or petty policy. This is a case of intimidation, fraud, and trespass. My client's property rights were violated repeatedly under the false authority of an HOA that extended far beyond its legal reach." The judge, an older man with clear eyes and a reputation for cutting through nonsense, nodded for her to continue. She laid out everything in order: the fake inspection, the forged notices, the video evidence of tampering. Each piece of paper she handed over felt like lifting another weight off my chest. When it was my turn to testify, the courtroom seemed to shrink. I kept my voice steady, even as I described finding bleach in my well, the smell, the fear, the helplessness. "He told me my water was unsafe," I said, eyes locked on Richard. "But it was never about safety. It was about control." Richard smirked, the same arrogant curl of the lip I'd seen on my doorstep months ago. His lawyer rose for cross-examination, circling me like a vulture. "Ms. Mitchell," he said smoothly, "isn't it true you began selling bottled water for profit without HOA approval?" Laura objected immediately. "Irrelevant. The HOA has no jurisdiction over private wells." The judge nodded. Sustained. "Move on." Richard's lawyer gritted his teeth but pressed on. "Would you say your actions were intended to embarrass the HOA?" I looked right at him. "No. My actions were intended to survive it." The gallery behind us murmured. Even the bailiff cracked a brief smile. When Richard finally took the stand, his charm evaporated. He stumbled through excuses, contradicted himself, and grew visibly angrier each time Laura exposed a lie. When she showed the footage of him pouring bleach into my well, he tried to argue it was a misunderstanding. The judge leaned forward, voice dry and cutting. "Mr. Dempsey, do most misunderstandings involve chemical contamination?" Richard didn't answer. By the time closing arguments ended, the courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. The judge reviewed his notes, adjusted his glasses, and finally spoke. "It is the judgment of this court that the Clearwater Estates HOA, under Mr. Dempsey's direction, grossly exceeded its authority. This board unlawfully interfered with private property rights, falsified documents, and engaged in targeted harassment." He paused, letting the silence sting. "The HOA is fined $250,000 in civil penalties. Ms. Mitchell is awarded full damages and restitution." Richard's head dropped. His lawyer stared straight ahead, pale and still. Legal nugget number 5. Property owners retain all pre-existing resource rights unless voluntarily deeded to an HOA. No board can seize or restrict a resource it did not create or own. The gavel hit the bench. Just like that, it was over. Months of sleepless nights, fear, and humiliation, washed away by the sound of justice landing clean and final. Outside, reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed, questions flew. Laura shielded me with a firm hand on my shoulder. "Don't answer yet," she whispered. "We're not done." I frowned. "Not done?" She opened her briefcase and pulled out a printed email chain, her eyes burning with certainty. "These came in during the hearing, from the HOA's own server. They show payment transfers, and a name we've never seen before." I scanned the header. A developer's logo glared back at me. Laura's voice dropped to a whisper. "Looks like Richard wasn't acting alone." Buried in Richard's inbox was a single email that explained everything. "Secure the wells, control the land. Developers will pay double." It was right there. Sitting in the attachments Laura had pulled from Discovery, a message chain between Richard, his brother Mark, and a man named Gregory Haskell from Haskell Development Group. Reading those words felt like staring into the rotten heart of the whole operation. This was never just about me or my well. It was about money, greed, and control over the entire neighborhood. The scheme was deceptively simple. The HOA, under Richard's leadership, would declare all private wells unsafe, forcing residents to buy into the Dempsey-run community water system. That system was intentionally overpriced, funneling profits through shell accounts and fake maintenance fees. Once the HOA had legal control of all groundwater rights in Clearwater Estates, the developer would swoop in, buy the land cheap, and resell it as eco-luxury lots with guaranteed water access. It was corruption wrapped in a community charter. Laura sat across from me at my dining table, laptop open, eyes scanning the documents like she was reading a confession. "This email chain is the smoking gun," she said. "He coordinated with a private developer while holding elected HOA office. That's collusion, fraud, and environmental violation. Maybe even racketeering if we push it." My stomach churned as she scrolled through the attachments. Invoices for testing materials that never existed, environmental reports forged with county letterheads, and payment transfers to offshore accounts. The deeper we looked, the uglier it got. "This wasn't just Richard trying to control the water," I said quietly. "He was trying to own the entire neighborhood." Laura nodded grimly. "And now, we take it higher." That afternoon, we met with investigators from the State Attorney General's office. They listened as Laura laid out every detail: the tampering, the fake inspector, the financial trails, the emails. I played them the footage of Richard contaminating my well. When it ended, one of the investigators, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice, said, "We'll need to coordinate with federal agencies. This crosses too many lines for state jurisdiction alone." Within a week, the FBI's Environmental Crimes Task Force got involved. They moved fast. Agents interviewed residents, subpoenaed HOA records, and pulled every electronic communication tied to Dempsey Water Solutions. Word spread like wildfire through Clearwater Estates. Black SUVs parked by the clubhouse, suits asking quiet questions, neighbors whispering about subpoenas over fences. For once, the fear wasn't mine. It was his. The night before the raid, I barely slept. Every creak of the house sounded like the ticking of a clock, counting down to the reckoning. When morning came, the sound of sirens broke the stillness. From my porch, I saw them roll in. 6 unmarked vehicles, lights flashing blue against the sunrise. Agents in windbreakers swarmed the HOA office. Someone shouted, "FBI! Search warrant!" The entire street seemed to hold its breath. Neighbors gathered on lawns, coffee mugs in hand, watching years of intimidation unravel in real time. Boxes were carried out, computers, ledgers, hard drives. Richard's brother was handcuffed first, his face pale, mouth tight. Then came Richard. He emerged in his usual pressed shirt, but the arrogance was gone. His hands were cuffed behind his back, his eyes darting to the crowd of residents lining the sidewalks. Some filmed, others clapped. One elderly man shouted, "How's that for HOA compliance, Richard?" The moment was surreal, the kind of justice you dream about but never expect to see. The man who'd weaponized bylaws and bleach, who'd treated the community like his personal empire, was now just another criminal being loaded into a black SUV. As the vehicles pulled away, Laura turned to me. "This doesn't erase what he did," she said softly, "but it exposes why he did it." And as I watched the convoy disappear down Clearwater Drive, I realized she was right. The fight had never been just about water. It was about power. Who controls it, who deserves it, and who finally loses it. But the story wasn't over yet. Because buried in those confiscated files were still more names. County officials, inspectors, maybe even local politicians. Richard Dempsey was only the beginning. The morning sunlight hit the well, and for the first time in months I could see the reflection of my own peace. The water rippled gently, untouched, clear enough to see the pebbles at the bottom. It no longer smelled of bleach or fear, only earth, stone, and morning air. The war was over. The headlines came first. Crisp black text on every local paper. HOA president pleads guilty to fraud and environmental tampering. Richard Dempsey, once the self-declared ruler of Clearwater Estates, now sat behind bars. The developer, Gregory Haskell, faced multiple charges for bribery and conspiracy. The Dempsey Brothers Company was shut down, and the HOA was officially dissolved by county order. When the state-appointed mediator called a meeting to restructure the association, it wasn't held in the clubhouse. That building was locked for investigation, but under the oak trees in the park. Folding chairs, open air, no podium, no gavel. Every homeowner got a vote. The new board was made of neighbors who'd once been afraid to speak. This time, there was no fine for disagreement, no threats disguised as policy, just people choosing honesty over hierarchy. Carol, one of the former board members who had quit early on, approached me after the vote. "You gave us our neighborhood back," she said, eyes misty. I smiled but shook my head. "No, you all took it back. I just refused to hand it over. As for me, I didn't go back to design work. Not full-time anyway. Something about bottling my own defiance into glass jars had changed me. Mitchell Spring Water had started as an act of rebellion, but now it had a purpose bigger than protest. Orders poured in from nearby towns after the news broke. People said it symbolized something: independence, honesty, purity. I hired 3 locals, set up a legitimate facility with FDA approval, and started delivering across the county. Every time I loaded a case into the truck, I thought about how it all began. A single man's hunger for control and a single woman's refusal to bend. There was irony in it. He tried to poison my freedom, and I turned it into something that nourished others. One afternoon, months after the sentencing, I drove past the old HOA office. The building sat empty, its sign removed, the walls stripped of their self-importance. A "for sale" sign swung lazily in the breeze. Where the old banner once read, "Community Integrity Office," someone had spray-painted a single word: freedom. I didn't stop to take a picture. I didn't need to. That word had already been burned into my story. Later, at the farmer's market, a woman bought a bottle and asked, "Is this really from your well?" I smiled. "Every drop." She nodded, then leaned in a little. "It tastes clean. Like something honest." That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of my own water, watching the stars. The crickets hummed, and the steady, soft sound of the well pump filled the air. It was the sound of ownership, of peace earned, not granted. They had tried to poison control into purity and failed. What they didn't understand was that purity doesn't come from control. It comes from truth. It flows naturally if you let it. So I raise a glass to anyone who's ever been bullied by a board, fined for standing their ground, or silenced for saying no. What would you do if your HOA tried to silence your freedom? Tell your story. Someone needs to hear it.